The charging cable. I wasn't supposed to be home that afternoon. My flight back from Denver got cancelled, and instead of calling Claire to tell her, I decided to surprise her. 12 years of marriage, and I still like the idea of walking through my own front door and hearing her yell my name like she meant it. The house was quiet when I got there, too quiet for 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday when she was supposed to be picking our daughter up from half-day kindergarten in an hour. Her car was in the driveway. My cable, the white one I keep in my laptop bag, the one with the little burn mark near the plug from an outlet that sparked once, was sitting on the kitchen counter, still warm to the touch, plugged into nothing. I hadn't left it there. I never leave it there. That's the whole story. Right there in that one detail, if you want to know how it started. Not a lipstick stain, not a text message, a charging cable that had no business being warm. I should have just asked her about it. That's what a normal person does. You hold up the cable, you say, "Hey, were you using this?" And she says, "Oh yeah, my phone died." And that's the end of it. I didn't do that. I put the cable back exactly where I found it, and I said nothing. For 2 weeks I watched. Not obsessively. I want to be clear about that, because I know how these stories usually go, and I know what you're picturing. I wasn't hiding in bushes. I wasn't checking her phone every night while she slept. I run engineering ops for a mid-sized logistics company. I solve problems by finding the piece of data that doesn't fit and pulling on it until the rest of the picture falls apart. That's what I did. I just started noticing. I noticed she started taking her phone into the bathroom when she showered. I noticed she'd started going to a 6 a.m. spin class 3 days a week at a gym across town instead of the one 2 minutes from our house. I noticed the grocery bill went up by about $40 a week, and none of it showed up in our pantry. None of these things on their own mean anything. A wife can join a new gym. A wife can buy groceries that get eaten before you notice them. A wife can take her phone into the bathroom because she likes listening to a podcast while she showers, which is exactly what she told me when I asked, lightly, like it was nothing. "You're being weird," she said, laughing it off. "Is this a midlife thing? Are you going to buy a motorcycle next?" I laughed too. I let it go. I wish that had been the worst part. The first real crack came from our daughter Ellie, who was 5 and had no idea she was handing her father a piece of evidence. "Mommy's friend has a cool car," she said one night at dinner, out of nowhere, the way kids do. "What friend, baby?" I asked, keeping my voice easy. "The one from the gym. He picked us up from swim one time 'cause Mommy's car made the funny noise." Claire didn't even look up from her plate. "Oh, Derek, from spin class. My car wouldn't start and he was already there, so he gave us a ride. I told you about that." She hadn't told me about that. I know she hadn't because I remember exactly what week her car wouldn't start. Because I was the one who called the tow truck for it 3 days later when it actually died in our driveway. A dead battery. Nothing dramatic. The kind of thing that happens to a 5-year-old car in December, except the tow truck guy told me the battery had clearly been dead for a while. Not 3 days, longer. Which meant either she was lying about when the car broke down, or she was lying about who picked her and Ellie up, or both. I didn't say anything that night either. I told myself I needed more before I said anything. I told myself that once, out loud, to an empty garage, and it sounded exactly as pathetic as it felt. Here's where I want to be honest with you, because I think it matters. I wasn't a perfect husband in the years leading up to this. I worked 60-hour weeks during a system migration that lasted the better part of a year. I missed 2 of Ellie's recitals. I fell asleep on the couch more nights than I care to admit. Phone in hand, half listening to Claire talk about her day while I answered Slack messages from people 3 time zones away. If you'd asked me, before the cable, whether my marriage was in trouble, I would have said no. I would have said we were just in a tired season, the way every marriage with a young kid and 2 full-time jobs goes through a tired season. I believed that. I think some part of Claire believed it too, right up until she didn't. That doesn't excuse what came next. But I'm not going to sit here and pretend I was blameless in the years that built the empty space she eventually let someone else fill. I just didn't know yet exactly how far she'd let him fill it. The name Derek kept surfacing. Small mentions. A funny thing Derek said at spin class. Derek's dog. Derek recommended a good electrician when our water heater went. Normal if you didn't know what to look for. Suspicious once you did. I found him on Instagram in about 4 minutes. Derek Holloway, 34, ran a small home renovation business, divorced. No, not divorced. Married. There was a wife in some of the older photos. Sarah tagged in a post from 18 months back smiling next to him at somebody's wedding. Nothing from her account in the last year. I didn't think much of that yet. I filed it away. I checked our shared Google account, the one Claire and I had set up years ago to share the family calendar and photo albums. Back when we were the kind of couple who thought sharing everything was romantic instead of a liability. Location timeline was still on for her phone. I want to be honest, I knew I probably shouldn't look. I looked anyway. Tuesday and Thursday mornings after spin class, her phone spent 40 minutes at an address that wasn't the gym. I mapped it. A rental property on Choctaw Street, a block that was mostly getting renovated old bungalows. I didn't need to guess whose renovation business that was. I sat in my car outside our own house for 20 minutes before I went inside that night. I don't remember what I told her when I walked in. I remember she asked if I was okay and I said I was tired. That's still, to me, the strangest part of the whole thing. How normal the evening still felt. How we still ate dinner together and put Ellie to bed together, and I still kissed my wife goodnight while a part of my brain was already building a case against her. I want to skip ahead a little because I could spend an hour telling you about every receipt and every Uber ping and every late credit card charge from a coffee shop 3 miles outside anywhere she should have been. Instead, I'll tell you about the day everything I'd been quietly gathering stopped being teary and became something I couldn't unknow. It was a Thursday. I told Claire I had a client dinner in the city and wouldn't be home until 9. I didn't have a client dinner. I sat in a Chipotle parking lot 2 blocks from Choctaw Street with a burrito I couldn't eat, and at 10:12 a.m., she told me spin class ran until 11. I watched her Honda pull into the driveway of the bungalow. I want to tell you I felt rage. What I actually felt was something closer to relief, which I know sounds insane. 12 days of half evidence and maybes had been its own kind of torture. Watching her get out of that car, look both ways like she was crossing a street instead of walking into another man's house, and knock twice before the door opened, that was, God help me, almost a mercy. At least now I knew. I didn't go up to the door. I didn't bang on it, didn't call her name, didn't do any of the things you imagine doing in that moment. I sat in my car and I took a single photo of her car in his driveway, time-stamped, and I drove to work like a man who'd just found out he had a disease he'd suspected for a while. Diagnosis isn't the same as death. It's just the end of not knowing. That night she told me spin class had run long and she grabbed coffee with the girls after. I said that sounded nice. I want you to sit with that for a second, because it's the part of this story people always ask me about later. Why didn't I say something right then? The answer is that I already understood something that took me another 2 months to fully act on. The moment I confronted her with what I knew, the evidence gathering was over. She would get careful, he would get careful. Whatever this was, an affair, a fling, a slow motion collapse of a marriage, I needed to understand its full shape before I let her know I could see it. So instead, I did something that surprised even me. I started building a file. I'm an engineer. Building systems is what I do for a living, and grief, it turns out, channels itself into whatever shape your hands already know. I made a folder on a cloud drive she didn't have access to, a brand new account, a password she'd never guess, nothing linked to our shared devices. I started logging dates, times, locations, screenshots of the shared timeline before she thought to turn it off, credit card charges that didn't match her stated whereabouts, the tow truck receipt with its little damning note about battery age. 2 things happened during this period that I didn't expect. The first was that my mother-in-law called me. Diane and I had always gotten along fine. Not close, but fine. The normal politeness of two people connected by someone they both loved. She called on a Sunday, ostensibly to ask about Ellie's upcoming birthday party, and about 6 minutes into the conversation she went quiet in a way that made the hair on my arm stand up. "Is everything okay with you two?" she asked. "Claire seemed, I don't know, off at dinner last week." "We're okay," I said. "Why? Did she say something?" A pause that lasted just slightly too long. No, forget I said anything. I've thought about that pause 100 times since. I still don't know if Diane knew something specific, or was just picking up on the same static I'd been picking up on for weeks. Mothers notice things. I never did find out exactly how much she knew, and I made a choice later not to ask her directly, because whatever she knew, she hadn't told her own daughter to stop, and I wasn't sure I wanted to know what that meant about the family I'd married into. The second thing was that Derek's actual wife found me, not the other way around. Her. Her name was Sarah, and she messaged me on Facebook on a Tuesday night while Claire was in the shower. With her phone, I now understood exactly why. "This is going to sound insane," the message started. "But I think our spouses might be seeing each other. I found a receipt in Derek's truck from a restaurant on the 14th, and I know for a fact he told me he was at a job site that day. I saw your wife's name come up when I was going through his phone bill, a number that texts him constantly. I looked her up. I think it's your wife. I'm so sorry if I'm wrong." She wasn't wrong. I sat on the edge of my bed reading that message 4 times, and something in my chest that had been braced and cold for weeks finally cracked open. Just slightly. Just enough to let in how much this was actually going to hurt. It's one thing to build a private case file, alone, in the dark, treating your own marriage like a work problem to be solved with data. It's another thing entirely to have a stranger confirm it from the outside, unprompted, her own voice shaking through the screen. We talked for 2 hours that night. Sarah told me things I didn't have yet, that she'd found a second phone hidden in Derek's truck, a prepaid one, and that the affair, according to messages on it, had started nearly 8 months earlier, not the 6 weeks I'd been assuming based on when I first noticed the cable and the gym and all of it. 8 months, which meant it started back during the migration project, back during all those 60-hour weeks and missed recitals and falling asleep on the couch mid-sentence. I'm not saying that to excuse her. I'm saying it because it changed, for me, what kind of story this actually was. It wasn't a 2-week fever dream that got out of hand. It was 8 months of a whole other life running quietly parallel to mine. In a house I drove past without knowing its address, with a man whose dog I'd unknowingly heard about at my own dinner table. Sarah and I agreed on something that night, without either of us fully saying it out loud. We weren't going to warn them. We were going to find out everything first. Over the next 3 weeks, Sarah and I built a joint file neither Claire nor Derek knew existed. She had access to things I didn't. His email, his business accounts, the second phone, which he was sloppy enough not to password protect once he thought she wasn't looking anymore. I had access to things she didn't. Claire's spending patterns, our joint accounts, and eventually, the thing that changed everything a second time. I found out Claire had opened a separate bank account 4 months earlier. Not a joint account, not a savings account for Ellie's college fund, which is what I assumed when I first saw the automated transfer on our statement. A solo account at a bank we'd never used, receiving small, irregular transfers from our joint checking, never more than $300 at a time, small enough that I'd apparently just not noticed for months, buried in a sea of Target and Costco and daycare charges. $9,200 sat in that account. I want to be honest about what went through my head in that moment because it wasn't what I expected. It wasn't even really about the affair anymore. It was a colder, more practical fear. The fear of a man who suddenly realizes his wife has been quietly building an exit while he was still making dinner reservations for their anniversary. Was this money for a lawyer? A deposit on an apartment? A shared account with Derek for after he left Sarah? I didn't know. And not knowing for the first time in this whole ordeal actually frightened me more than the affair itself had. That's when I called a lawyer of my own, quietly, just to understand where I stood. The lawyer, a sharp, unhurried woman named Priya, told me something I hadn't considered. That in our state, that hidden account, money moved from joint funds without my knowledge, could matter enormously in a divorce, and that the smartest thing I could do right now was absolutely nothing dramatic, no confrontation, no accusations, just documentation and patience and a clear head. The spouse who reacts first usually loses leverage, she said. She let her think she's still ahead. So I kept living the double life of a man who knew everything and said nothing. I went to Ellie's dance recital and clapped in the front row next to Claire, who reached over at one point and squeezed my hand, and I squeezed back. And some small, stupid, still hoping part of me wondered if I was wrong about all of it. If there was an explanation, if I was about to blow up my family over a warm charging cable and a bad feeling. Then Sarah sent me a photo from Derek's second phone. A message from Claire from that morning, time-stamped an hour after she'd kissed me goodbye at the door. Can't stop thinking about last night. Wish it didn't have to be a secret. I wasn't wrong. The twist I didn't see coming, the one that actually made me put my coffee down and read the message 4 times, came from Sarah 2 days later. Derek wasn't just planning to leave her for Claire. He was planning to leave both of them for a third woman. A yoga instructor named Priyanka he'd been seeing since even before things with Claire started. According to messages Sarah found buried in an old email draft folder, he apparently used like a diary when he was drunk. Claire didn't know about her. Sarah hadn't known about either of them until 3 weeks ago. Derek Holloway, it turned out, wasn't the smooth, patient homewrecker I'd built up in my head during 2 months of quiet surveillance. He was a man running 3 separate lies at once, badly, and it was only a matter of time before at least one of them collapsed under its own weight even without our help. That reframed something for me. I'd spent weeks assembling a case against a villain and a woman who'd been swept up by him. What I actually had was a much messier, much sadder picture. A man cycling through women, who each thought they were the exception, and a wife who, whatever else was true, had genuinely believed she'd found something real, not realizing she was one name on a longer list than she knew. I don't say that to make Claire sympathetic. What she did to our marriage doesn't get erased by the fact that the man she did it with was worse than she realized. I say it because it's the truth, and because it changed the shape of what came next. Sarah and I made our decision on a Thursday night, over the phone, both of us equal parts exhausted and resolved. We weren't going to scream. We weren't going to key his truck or show up at the bungalow or do any of the things that feel satisfying in the moment and cost you everything in a courtroom 6 months later. We were going to let the truth do the work, all at once, in a way that gave neither of them room to spin a story before the facts were already out in the open. I met with Priya again. We drew up paperwork quietly, an initial divorce filing, ready to go the moment I needed it, built entirely around documentation that predated any confrontation, which mattered more than I realized at the time. I moved a portion of our joint savings into an account solely in my name, legally, with Priya's guidance, protecting what I could before anything became contested. I didn't touch a cent of what Claire had squirreled away. I let that sit exactly where it was, because I wanted the timeline of that account to speak for itself later. Sarah did something similar on her end, with her own lawyer and separately, without me asking, without either of us planning it together. She reached out to Priyanka. That part I only heard about after the fact. Sarah told her gently and honestly what she'd found and offered proof. Priyanka, it turned out, genuinely hadn't known about Claire or Sarah. She was furious, and she was done. And this is the detail that still gets me. She was the one who told Derek's business partner what was going on because Priyanka had done some of the design work for 2 of his renovation clients and didn't want her name anywhere near a man who lied this comprehensively. Within a week, Derek's business partner, who had been quietly unhappy about missed deadlines for months, used it as the excuse he'd apparently been waiting for and moved to dissolve their partnership. Derek's whole carefully separated life started coming apart in places he never told any of us to touch. The night I finally confronted Claire, I didn't plan a speech. I'd imagined this moment for 2 months in a dozen different versions, some angry, some tearful, one absolutely deranged 3 a.m. fantasy that involved Ellie's kindergarten parking lot for some reason I still can't explain. What actually happened was quieter than any of them. Ellie was asleep. Claire was on the couch scrolling her phone, and I sat down across from her, and I put a folder on the coffee table between us. Not thrown, not slammed, just set down. "What's this?" she asked, already half smiling, the way you do when you don't yet understand what's about to happen to you. "Open it," I said. She did. I watched her face change page by page. The Choctaw Street photo, the bank statement with the hidden account highlighted, the screenshot Sarah had sent me, printed out in black and white so there'd be no phone to grab or delete. "I know about Derek," I said. "I know about the account. I know it's been 8 months, not 6 weeks. And I know you're not the only one." She went very still. "What do you mean, not the only one?" "That's the part that told me everything I still needed to know. Not I can explain. Not it's not what it looks like." Her first question, the very first thing out of her mouth once she understood she'd been caught, was about her own position in the hierarchy of Derek's lies. I told her about Sarah, about Priyanka. I watched something in her expression I can only describe as the specific humiliation of a person who thought they were the exception discovering they were a footnote. She cried. She apologized eventually, in the disorganized way people do when they're not entirely sure yet what they're apologizing for. The affair, or getting caught, or both, tangled together. I didn't yell. I didn't need to. Priya had been right. I already had complete control of the room, because I'd walked in already knowing how the story ended, and Claire was only just now finding out. I already filed, I told her, which wasn't quite true yet, but would be true by morning. This isn't a conversation about whether we're getting divorced, it's a conversation about how. I won't pretend the months after that were easy because they weren't, and any version of this story that tells you revenge feels like a clean, triumphant high isn't telling you the truth. There were nights I sat in my car in a parking garage after work because I couldn't stand to go home to a house that still smelled like a marriage that no longer existed. There were nights Ellie asked why mommy was crying and I had to find an answer a 5-year-old could survive hearing. But the practical parts, the parts I'd spent 2 quiet months preparing for, went almost exactly the way Priya had said they would. The hidden account, documented with a clean timeline predating any confrontation, weighed heavily in the settlement. The affair itself, while not something our state's courts particularly cared about on its own, made Claire far less inclined to fight me on custody specifics once she understood how much of the story I could produce and how little of it painted her sympathetically. We settled without a trial. I kept the house for Ellie's sake more than mine. We split custody close to evenly, which is, honestly, the outcome I actually wanted. Not to win a war against Claire, just to make sure Ellie never had to feel like she was the casualty of one. Sarah and I stayed in touch for a while after, in the strange way you do with a person who went through the worst month of your life alongside you, and then has no other reason to remain in it. She divorced Derek too. Last I heard, his renovation business folded within the year, and I felt, if I'm honest, a small, ungenerous flicker of satisfaction at that, one I'm not proud of, and won't pretend I didn't feel. Claire and Derek didn't last. I don't know all the details, and I stopped wanting to know them somewhere around the 6-month mark, which felt like the first genuinely healthy decision I'd made in the entire ordeal. It's been a year and a half now. Ellie is in first grade. She has 2 bedrooms that are both hers, and a picture of the 3 of us, me, her, Claire, on her nightstand at both houses, because I decided early on that Ellie didn't need to inherit my anger, even if she was allowed someday to understand the shape of it. Claire and I are civil. Not friends, not yet, maybe not ever, but civil in the specific practical way 2 people manage when they're going to be co-parenting a person they both love for the next 13 years. We talk about school pickups and dentist appointments. Sometimes that's the whole conversation, and I've come to find something almost peaceful in that. I still have the cable. Same one, same little burn mark near the plug. It lives in my laptop bag, where it always did, and I don't know why I never replaced it. Maybe because some part of me wanted a reminder that the smallest, most ordinary object can be the first thread of a much bigger truth, if you're willing to actually pull on it instead of looking away. People ask me sometimes if I regret not confronting her the day I found it warm on the counter. I don't. I think if I had, I would have gotten an apology, a promise, maybe even a version of the truth small enough for me to swallow, and I would have spent the rest of my life quietly wondering what I never found out. Instead, I know exactly what happened, when, and why. That knowledge cost me a marriage I thought I'd have for the rest of my life. It also, eventually, gave me one I actually trust.